And I wanted to thank everybody who joined the call today. Advocacy is a very important part of what the pulmonary hypertension community does, but I would also say it's probably one of the lesser known aspects of what we do. So we're going to talk a little bit about advocacy in general today, and then we're going to talk about a specific opportunity that's going on right now on Capitol Hill. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Dane. I'm Vice President of the Health and Medicine Council of Washington. I'm one of the Washington representatives for the Pulmonary Hypertension Association. I'm here with Elizabeth, who is the Grassroots Campaign Manager for Pulmonary Hypertension Association. We have a very effective and ever-growing network called the 435 Campaign, which is a grassroots advocacy network, and I hope that everyone on the call today will have an opportunity to learn about that and see how they might be able to make a contribution. So before we get started, since we've got some new people joining us, I wanted to kind of give a little bit of a primer on what advocacy is, or kind of why advocacy. Why do we do exercises like this? And the reality of the situation is that the federal government touches on nearly every part of healthcare in this country. And I know there was a big contentious discussion about the Affordable Care Act and healthcare reform and the implementation of these exchanges, but that's not really what we're talking about today. That is a good example, though, of how involved federal programs are in how we get healthcare in this country. What we're mainly focusing on is a lot of these lesser known and other parts of healthcare delivery that the government has jurisdiction over. There's the National Institutes of Health, which is the country and really the world's foremost biomedical research enterprise. It's a little known fact that most research into treatment development and new cures and diagnostic tools and things like that doesn't take place in industry. It takes place through the National Institutes of Health. The National Institutes of Health actually gives out money which scientists compete for at academic centers across the country, like the University of Texas Biology Lab. They get funding from NIH, and then they use that to their research on, be it mouse models or cell therapies or things like that. And their breakthroughs are what industry then uses to develop most treatment options or diagnostic tools. So NIH, the Food and Drug Administration, is probably something that folks are a little more familiar with. They're the ones who oversee and approve treatments and kind of the treatment development process. And then there's things like the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which really are involved in patient care and how health care gets delivered in this country. So since the federal government is so involved in health care, it makes our efforts that much more important. Congress, the House and the Senate, have jurisdiction over federal agencies. So these folks are your elected officials. So I guess you could say by the transitive property, you really have jurisdiction over these agencies. So the type of research that NIH is doing, or what FDA is focused on, or how patient care is getting delivered is something that you can talk to your elected officials about, and they can in turn, kind of work the mechanisms of these federal agencies to make sure that things are moving along in a manner that benefits the PH community, and definitely aren't doing things that might hurt or hinder the PH community. So everybody has, if you're an American citizen, you have one local representative and 2 senators that represent your state. And these folks are elected officials, and they want to hear from you. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or they're a Democrat, or the political ideology of it, if you voted for them or not. It's not that important. They're there to serve their constituents. They get reelected by serving their constituents, and their job description is that they listen to what their constituents have to say, and then they take action accordingly. And not every issue, is the one that makes headlines. Not every issue is the debt ceiling fight, or setting the federal budget, or something like drone policy that might end up on the front page of the newspaper. A lot of the times, most of the work that members of Congress do is listening to their constituents on issues like pulmonary hypertension, and doing things accordingly that never generate headlines and never end up in the news, but are very important to the folks that they affect. But I'm sure everybody's familiar with the phrase, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. That's true on Capitol Hill with your one representative and two senators. There's nobody up on Capitol Hill who's advocating against the PH community, but there's no counterbalance, to what we're trying to do. So really, the only enemy is ignorance and a lack of awareness. A member of Congress probably has never heard of pulmonary hypertension. It is a rare condition. They can't know everything about every issue, and if they don't know about it, they can't take appropriate action. They can't do right by their affected constituents. The only way to get them educated is to explain to them what they need to know, explain to them how this affects people locally, and then ask them to take appropriate action. And that appropriate action is HR 273, which we're going to talk to later today. Now, PHA influences policy on Capitol Hill through a nationwide grassroots network. A nationwide grassroots network, a 435 campaign in this instance, is just simply a collection of individuals who want to make their voice heard. You don't need to be an expert in civics or government. You just need to want to make a difference. And by working together, by carrying the same message to Capitol Hill, by doing this as a team, we're more effective. And we have been effective. Elizabeth can speak to this more directly, but for a rare pulmonary hypertension is one of the most successful conditions from a research and treatment development standpoint that the federal government has ever invested money in. There's 11 FDA-approved treatment options now. There's millions of dollars of research at NIH, and that's because people who are affected have made it a priority to talk to their members of Congress about it and get the government mobilized on this. Now, of course, as many of you know, we can do more, and there's more that needs to be done. But we have been successful so far, and we're hopeful that we can continue that moving forward. And now what we want to do is the more folks who participate and the more folks who lend their voice to this effort, the more impactful we can be. Think of it as a growing chorus. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. Now here is the current specific problem facing the community. I'm sure many of you might already be familiar with this. There is a healthcare issue that the government can take action on that affects PH patients. We just mentioned that there's been 11 FDA-approved treatment options. Well, unfortunately, most of these treatment options depend on an early intervention. The earlier you can be accurately diagnosed and begin appropriate therapy, the better your health outcomes are. Now, currently, there's a 2-year median survival rate for folks without treatment. Unfortunately, it's also about 2.8 years before you receive an accurate diagnosis. So even though there's been these 11 treatment options, most folks aren't diagnosed until they have a later stage of PH. I believe it's 3 out of 4, which makes a lot of these therapies and interventions not as effective as they could be. Now, this is obviously bad for the PH community and bad for PH patients, but it's also bad for the federal government. Every time that there's been a misdiagnosis for a PH patient, they may be facing a more drastic and costly procedure. Instead of beginning an infusion treatment, maybe they're looking at a heart-lung transplantation. Maybe they're on disability. These are all things that the federal government worries about in addition to preserving and advancing human life. They're very cost-sensitive to how their policies might be penny-wise and pound-foolish in the sense that by not having diagnosis quickly enough, we're costing the federal government a tremendous amount of money, especially when we have available treatments that could preserve life and do this better. So right now, what we're trying to do is address this diagnosis window. If it takes 2.8 years to get diagnosed and most folks have advanced PH, how can the government, how can these agencies we just talked about, the National Institutes of Health or the Health Resources and Services Administration, which handles how physicians are instructed and also organ transplantation, how can they work together to close this diagnosis window to ensure that most folks are diagnosed when they have early stage PH and can begin appropriate therapy? Next slide, please. So HR 2073 is a bill. You may remember Schoolhouse Rock with Bill sitting up on Capitol Hill It is a piece of legislation. It is what would become a federal law. H.R. 2073 applies to the number with which it was introduced in the House of Representatives. So this is the 2073rd bill that was introduced last year. The name of the bill is the Pulmonary Hypertension Research and Diagnosis Act. It is solely focused on pulmonary hypertension, and it's solely focused on addressing this diagnosis problem. And what the bill does is establish what's called a Federal Coordinating Committee. This committee is tasked with making recommendations for how to speed up an early and accurate diagnosis. This committee would be leaders in the public health service. It would be key folks at the National Institutes of Health, HRSA, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, similar entities, and also PH patients, leading medical experts on PH. All of them would get together and meet on a regular basis, and what they would do is prepare a report, and that report would include recommendations for how we as a country can improve that diagnosis window and make sure that folks are getting diagnosed earlier and earlier. And Congress would ask them to demonstrate how this, they wouldn't just be toothless. Congress would be asking them to demonstrate an increase in the survival rate. We're going to do what we can to implement some of these recommendations, and we want you to show that they work. So these are meant to be good quality recommendations, and the bill would require them to do this. And it may seem a little strange that different federal agencies have to be instructed to work with each other and the pulmonary hypertension community on a problem like this, but unfortunately that's just how the government is set up. They don't really engage each other and work collaboratively unless they're forced to or instructed to, and this is a problem or an issue where they need to work together because everybody has a different perspective and can bring something to the table to help solve this problem. Next slide, please. Now, a little bit about the bill. It is a piece of legislation. It is before the House right now. The key facts about this is that the legislation is bipartisan and also budget neutral. Bipartisan means that the bill is supported by both parties, both Democrats and Republicans. The bill was introduced by Congressman Kevin Brady from Texas. Congressman Kevin Brady is a very conservative Republican. He is also a leader on health policy. He is the chairman of the Health Subcommittee of the Ways and Means Committee in the House. So his colleagues look to him as an expert on these kinds of issues. He worked to craft this bill, and he, as a health policy leader and also as a conservative Republican, said, I think this is the right idea. I think we can be effective on this. And his counterpart is Congresswoman Lois Capps, a Democrat from California. Congresswoman Capps is about as progressive as you can be, but she's also a leader on health policy issues. She's on the health part of the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House. So you have both of the health committees in the House represented on this bill, and also the complete spectrum of political ideology. So this isn't a Democrat or Republican bill. This is a pulmonary hypertension community bill that really any member of Congress should feel comfortable supporting regardless of their political ideology. The key part about this bill is that I know there's been an awful lot discussed in the media, as some of you probably know, about the budget and about federal spending and about how do we cut back, how do we prioritize programs. This bill does not mandate a new federal program. All it's doing is requiring these different folks that represent existing programs to meet and produce this report. And technically, none of that counts as a new cost for the federal government. And in reality, the report that they prepare will likely save the government money. If you are saving lives, if you are getting more folks diagnosed early with PH and getting them onto appropriate therapy, you're then likely avoiding these costly procedures like heart-lung transplantation. So you might even be a savings for the federal government if they enact this legislation. So the bill is bipartisan, meaning both parties support it, and it's budget neutral, meaning that there is no expense incurred by the government to move this forward. So really, any member of the House of Representatives can support this. There's nothing either procedurally or politically that would hold them back. Next slide, please. So this is how we make progress on the bill. Your voice counts. Elizabeth and I are in Washington, D.C. area every day, but if we went down to every member of Congress and said, hey, there's a great bill, it can save the government money, it can save people's lives, it affects a lot of your constituents affected by pulmonary hypertension, every member of Congress, except for ours, would say, that's great, thank you for telling me, but I need to hear, if this was such a big issue, I would hear about it from my constituents. We need members of Congress to become what are called co-sponsors of the bill. They need to say that they support it and that they would vote for it. But they will only co-sponsor the bill if they're asked locally by a constituent. Somebody that they represent must ask them to co-sponsor the bill. And the best way to do that is to educate them about pulmonary hypertension, educate them about why there's this problem with diagnosis, and then say, hey, there's an easy way to do this. Congressman Brady, Congresswoman Capps have come together and created a bill, H.R. 2073. We just need you to co-sponsor it. Now, the more co-sponsors a bill has, the more likely that bill is to be passed into law. You mentioned that 2073 was the numerical order of the bill that was introduced. So there's 2,073 other bills at least out there at this point in time. How do you pick one and over another when you have limited time to debate them, to vote on them, to move them forward if you're Congress? You do that by prioritizing the ones that have the most support. It doesn't make a lot of sense to bring up a bill that has 4 co-sponsors when you could bring up a bill that has 140 co-sponsors. And that means that 140 different representatives from all across the country would have to have said, I want to support this bill, and I'm going to co-sponsor the bill. Right now, H.R. 2073 has 15 Democratic co-sponsors and 5 Republican co-sponsors. There's 20 co-sponsors on the bill, which is more than most, but we can do a lot better, and that's why we need your help. That's why we need you to reach out to your legislators. We can do this. We can get more folks to become co-sponsors, and we can assist you with making sure that they understand the value and importance of working for the PH community and co-sponsoring a measure like this. Next slide, please. So what we're asking you to do is advocate for H.R. 2073. Where since we have that discrepancy between 15 Democratic and 5 Republican offices, we have done a little bit to prioritize reaching out to moderate Republicans. There are 80 moderate Republicans in the House. We think this was a bill that they could really like, since it is budget neutral, since it helps out so many folks. And we want to keep that balance with both Democrats and Republicans supporting it, but really we need everybody to support it. We need everyone in the country to know about it and to at least have considered co-sponsorship. So what we're asking folks to do, and Elizabeth is going to get much more detailed on this and with our specific campaign coming up, because we're going to ask you to be involved. As I mentioned previously, you don't have to be an expert on politics to bring a message like this. You just have to want to make a difference. And that means making a phone call, sending emails, writing a letter, maybe even meeting with the office of your congressperson locally. They want to meet with you. They're very hospitable. They're very accommodating of requests like this. Seeing folks like you on a regular basis is what they do. In reality, the 20 folks who are already co-sponsors of the bill are co-sponsors because they were asked. I know Diane Ramirez or Perry Mimogian, who are 2 great patient advocates, will be able to tell you, they've gone in, they've talked to members of Congress, and after that conversation, the office and the staff have said, we can do this, we can co-sponsor the bill. And the 20 names that are currently co-sponsors, even Congressman Brady, reflect the fact that they have been engaged locally on this, and one of their constituents, asked them to take action. So there's no reason to think that you won't be equally successful. And one of the things that's important is by reaching out to your congressional offices, you're really building a relationship for them. This is just one issue, but there are always issues impacting the pulmonary hypertension community. You're going to need to continually make sure your members of Congress are aware of them. And let's not forget, there's an election coming up in November. The person that you're educating this year about PH issues might be a completely new legislator next year. So it's always nice to have that. It doesn't matter who's in office. They're still going to want to hear from you, and you still have an opportunity to explain to them how they can help the community out. Next slide, please. So just as a little bit of additional information, time is a factor. The bill has been introduced, but the bill needs to be moved through the legislative process by the end of the year. If it isn't, it starts all over again with just Congressman Brady and Congresswoman Capps supporting it. So we have a few months where we need to get as many folks co-sponsoring the bill as we can. So we're asking you to be persistent. What we really need is when you engage the office, when you call or email, these folks, these congressional staffers and these offices that you're reaching out to, they get a lot of requests. Folks call them every day. You're going to be speaking specifically to a staffer who handles health issues. Well, after that staffer talks to you, they're probably also talking to somebody from the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. They're probably also talking to somebody from Susan G. Komen, and it's hard for them to keep track of all of that. So if you only call or email or correspond with them once, it's very easy for them to lose track of your request. But if you call, email, and talk to them on a regular basis until they've given you a direct response to what you're asking, will the congressman co-sponsor? Have you had a chance to talk about this? That means that they'll definitely, at some point, they will definitely get it done and they will get back to you. So we're looking for, with the being under the gun with just a few months till the session ends, we're asking folks to be engaged and persistent to keep talking to the office and the staff until they get that response. Yes, the congresswoman will co-sponsor. No, not this time. We need to keep talking to them until we have a definitive answer on our request. And as I mentioned just previously, think of yourself as a resource for the office. Education's a real obstacle. Nobody on Capitol Hill would say that they were opposed to this. They just don't know about it. So think of yourself as a way to educate these offices, educate them about not just pH medically, but what it means to you, how it's impacted your life. And they're there to serve. They might see some ways they can help that we haven't even asked them about. They might take this in some new directions, knowing just with the knowledge of how the community is impacted, it might give them opportunities where they can make a contribution and try and move things in the right direction, either advancing research or facilitating treatment development. But it all starts with you. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to next slide. I'm going to turn things over to Elizabeth, who's going to talk more about this specific campaign. We're scheduled for an hour, but much of this time is going to be devoted to kind of questions and a dialogue at the end. So Elizabeth's going to talk for about the next 15 minutes about what we're going to do specifically to have an impact on this. But please, if you have questions you're thinking of or something you want to talk about, you'll get an opportunity shortly.
Thank you. And I'd also like to point out that if you are on the web portion of this webinar, there is a handy chat feature that you can use to ask questions. Now, I'm monitoring that and now also giving a presentation, so I will do my best to present and answer as we go along. And if I am not able to while I'm talking, I will definitely save those for the end. So feel free to put in your questions. To prepare for this call, one of the things I did was I called some PHers who have made visits before. And I asked a few of them, just for some advice, and maybe if they had any words of wisdom to give to people who maybe aren't very familiar with their members of Congress or how to make a visit. And a couple of people mentioned that it's good to sort of break down the newness of it, the official, a lot of people think, okay, well, I'm going to visit my member of Congress. It's very official, and some people might think these are people who know so much stuff, and it's hard to sort of, might seem a little stuffy and this just great official thing to do. So the next few slides are meant to break down the various stages of a district visit, so you know maybe more of what to expect during your district visit, what happens, what you should do before, what you'll notice during the visit, and what will happen after. So one thing I want you to start thinking about is this question that's on the screen. Just sort of imagine maybe a little bit what you expect to meet. What does a typical congressional staffer look like? and maybe you're thinking it's someone who's, an expert on legislative policy, healthcare policy specifically. Maybe it's someone who's a little older, or maybe it's someone who wears a suit all the time. Well, I pulled together a few photos from our most recent congressional visits. So these are all people who made visits to their members of Congress, I believe, in the last year. So one thing there are a few things that you'll notice. One, you'll see the staffers their heads are all circled with a big red circle. One thing you'll notice is that they are all very young. And there's not much else to say about that. They're all pretty young. They work a lot. So I looked at some research that the Congressional Management Foundation did. They sort of manage congressional staffers and look to sort of see, they do a lot of polls and find out what congressional staffers are like, what they go through, what it's like to do their jobs. They found that, staffers work a lot. In the district offices, they work 45 to 50 hours a week. They're busy. They've got, like Dane was saying, they talk to you, they talk to someone from other health care related organizations. They talk to a lot of people. They have a lot to do. There's another thing I'll say is, there's so many issues that they need to be up on. If you think about a healthcare staffer, health policy covers so many different issues, and it's almost impossible for them to know everything. That's why, as Dane was saying earlier, one of the reasons a lot of members haven't supported this bill is because no one has told them that they should. No one has told them about pulmonary hypertension. I've talked to a few people who are very surprised that when they met with their member of Congress or their health LA, that the health LA didn't know anything about pulmonary hypertension. That's why, this is such a great opportunity for everyone on this call to step in and meet with their member of Congress and explain what pulmonary hypertension is, because in many cases it's just that they do not know anything about it. So one thing I'll say, I've talked a lot about how hard they work, but despite the work, they're very satisfied with their jobs. I think 3/4 said that they find a meaningfulness in their job, and that is very important to them. So these are people who may be busy, but they want to help you. The only thing they need is to know what it is you would like them to do. So I spoke with Noelle Hawley, who last year made her very first district visit to her representative. And I asked her a little bit about her experience. This is, the quote on your screen is what she had to say immediately following her visit. And I should say she wishes she could be on the phone call today, but unfortunately she had a conflict. But anyway, so when I was talking to her on Wednesday, I asked her what it was that made her take this leap and make her first district visit. This is someone who has been involved in PHA a little bit in fundraising, but I don't think she'd ever sent an email to her members of Congress. I don't think she'd ever made a phone call. And one day she sort of just decided this is something that she wanted to do. She said, again, she reiterated this is something she never, ever, 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 I think she said ever 100 times, that I ever thought I would do. But when I saw some of PHA's resources online, I felt like I had nothing else to lose. What she was specifically referring to, and I'll talk a little bit about this in the next slide, is there's a 5-minute video on our website that shows you how to find out who your members of Congress are. Like Dane said, you have 2 senators and 1 representative. You'll find out the contact information for each of their offices, and then you can even find out if they've supported PH legislation in the past, which is good information for you to have as you head into your visit. I should have put the link on the slide, but if you would like to view that video, you can go to www.phassociation.org and then /how to contact Congress. So as far as first steps, like I said, you can go, so if you go to phassociation.org/district visit, that's sort of just a general overview of everything that we're going to talk about on this call, with maybe a few more tips and videos and quotes and photos for you to take a look at. But yeah, this is such a great resource. It really allows you to find out who your members are and their contact, and again, do that research. It's all right there for you with a few clicks of a button, and I think you maybe have to put in your address and zip code. You have so much information right at your fingertips. So, figure out who they are, get their contact information. The next step is to call the office. PHA, again, if you feel like you're not quite sure what to say, there are some telephone scripts online that you can use. Feel free to adapt them as you see fit. You don't have to use them word for word, but some people find them to be helpful when they're making their phone calls. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that when you're setting up your appointment, if you can get a meeting with your member of Congress, that's so great. That's wonderful, and you should definitely do it. But members of Congress, they sort of split their time in D.C. and then also the district office. So you may call and try and set up an appointment at a time when they are not in town. That is okay. You should continue and try and make a visit with their staffer in the office. These are people, like I said, they work hard. They advise their member on all kinds of health-related issues. They're just a very important person to make a relationship and just to get to know. And it's also great because, like I mentioned, members of Congress might not be in their district office all the time. So, you can only make a visit a few times a year if you're really just trying to meet your member of Congress. If you are wanting to meet with a staffer, like I said, they work 45 to 50 hours a week. They're usually there. So it's a great way to get in and get a visit. So next steps as you're preparing for your visit, you don't have to do this alone. You can invite friends or caregivers or family members or any other constituents. Sometimes it might help to have someone come along with you if you're a little nervous. And keep in mind, I've told a lot of people this, you don't have to have PH in order to talk to your member of Congress about PH. I've been on a couple of visits, and some of the most successful ones I was on there was a PH patient, there was a caregiver, and there was a medical professional. And it sort of provided a very well-rounded picture of what it's like to live with PH, to treat PH, to help someone who has PH. So just keep that in mind, especially since the staffer really might not know a ton about PH. You really can provide a well-rounded picture if you bring others in with you. So you want to plan the visit a little bit. Plan what you want to say. Like I mentioned, Noelle did a little bit of homework. So before she made her visit and made her call, she found out that her member had co-sponsored a PH-specific bill. I think it was a couple of sessions prior. So she sat down in her meeting and she found out she was talking to her member about the bill and co-sponsoring. And when she asked him, "Will you co-sponsor this bill?" he said, "Oh, I never sponsor disease-specific bills. That's just not something I ever do." And she was able to say, that's really interesting because 2 years ago you did. You sponsored this bill, and she asked him again. I think he was a little flabbergasted, I guess, and shuffled some papers around. And she's still working on him, but it's good to know sort of what their history with PH legislation is. So make sure you do a little bit of your homework. And then it's a good idea to create an agenda for the meeting. So one thing to keep in mind, these meetings might not be super long, maybe 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes. So it's good to have sort of like an agenda in mind. So maybe for the first couple of minutes you want to introduce yourself. If there are other people there, you want to make sure that they introduce themselves. You maybe want to spend 5 minutes just talking about pH and what it is, how it affects the body. And then maybe 10-ish minutes to talk about your story. And if there are other people in the group, maybe coordinate who tells which story, and there are different kinds to tell. So you can talk about your diagnosis. You can talk about how many doctors you went through because this is a rare disease and not every doctor knew to look for pH. Maybe someone can bring in their medication and talk about what is involved every day with their medication. Maybe someone could talk about the cost to their medication. So there's a lot of things that you could share, but because the meetings are generally pretty short, you want to sort of figure out beforehand which stories you want to tell. And then after that, you want to spend a few minutes talking about the bill and how it will help the PH community. And one thing that is very important at the very end is to make the ask. Ask your member of Congress whether they will co-sponsor the bill. And then, always thank your member of Congress or the staffer and for sitting down with you, and that will sort of signal the end of the meeting. So now that you've done all that work to prepare for your meeting, and a lot of this stuff we've already gone through, so the meeting is pretty quick, 15, 20, 25 minutes. And like I said, you might not meet with your member of Congress, but that is definitely okay. You might not be able to answer every question, and that is also okay. If they ask you something really specific about PH or about PHA or about how many other PHers are in their district, medications that you don't know, that's fine. It's better to say, I'm not sure, but I can get back to you. And in fact, that is such a great excuse to get back to them. And while you're emailing or calling them with the information that they requested, you can also say, and by the way, have you considered whether you're going to co-sponsor the bill? You can sort of get another ask in there. So that is a great way to take something where you don't know the answer and turn it into a positive and use it to ask again. So yes, very, very important. If you definitely want to make that ask. At the very end, members of Congress and their staff, they won't know how to help you unless you tell them. So just make sure, and it's as simple as saying, I hope that you will co-sponsor the PH Research and Diagnosis Act. So then what do you do once your visit is finished? Like I said, whether there was a question there that you were unable to answer and wanted to get back to them or not, just make sure you follow up with them, even if it's as simple as an email or a phone call to say, thanks so much for meeting with me. We just wanted to check and make sure if there was anything you needed, any more information, and would the member of Congress co-sponsor the bill. And the final thing to do is to tell us about it. So Dane has mentioned that we're coordinating this large effort. We really want to get more members of Congress behind this bill. So let us know how what you're doing and how it's going. We are definitely here to help you throughout the process. At any part of the process. So just let us know what's going on. We want to share your victories, your successes, and just sort of troubleshoot any issues that you might have. So I'll say just here's our contact information. Again, the phassociation.org/district visit is a very helpful website. So make sure that you check that, and then I will open up the call to any questions. And I will say I have one question. Can you list the moderate Republican legislators we would like to target? So I think what I'll do at the end of this call is send out an email to everyone with the recording to this webinar, and then I can list the Republicans that we're trying to target. Let me. So
this
Dane,
is Dane. I just want to make I just want to make one point of clarification before anybody has any questions, and that is, we've said a couple of times we want you to reach out to your members' offices and educate them about PH. When we say educate, there's a common misconception that that a disease has to be particularly deadly or particularly prevalent, and that somehow gets more attention. But that's really not the case. When we say educate, we don't mean what the prevalence is or how the disease works or anything like that. We're really asking you just to explain the human toll of the condition in your own words. if you get into a conversation about how many people it affects or anything overly informative, overly empirical, it's easy to talk about it in the abstract. When you're talking to these offices, you want them to know what this has meant to your family, what it's meant to you personally. That's a lot more powerful than talking about it as kind of like a list of scientific facts about the condition.
So someone just asked if we could find out if you have any other people targeting the member of Congress in my district. Christina, definitely. Let me go back to contact information. If you could email me your address, and if you know what your district is, let me know who that is, and I can get you in touch with people that we've identified that are in your district, and maybe you can coordinate with them. Are there any other questions? If you have questions, there is a way that you can raise your hand, and I will I'll unmute those lines and let you ask your question. So someone just asked, are you going to send out an email copy or a hard copy of the slides of the presentation? I can do that along with the recording to the presentation. So Diane Ramirez has her hand raised, and I'm trying, let's see. Trying to figure out which one is your phone number to unmute. I might just unmute all and see what happens.
The conference has been unmuted.
Hey there, Diane.
Hi, everyone. I have a question in particular to my district for Dane. I'm in District 12 in North Carolina, and our representative resigned in January because he took a finance House position, or the housing, federal housing position. Anyway.
Know what?
Yes. So I have reached out to him numerous times. You were with me in D.C. when I ran into him in the hall, and it's been an ongoing thing for 6-7 years. So what do I do now that I can't reach out to Representative Watt for my district? And the way it's set up right now in North Carolina, there's not going to be an election for this district until the regular election in November.
Right. That's a good question. And obviously when the November election comes, then you'll only have a relatively short amount of time to get him on board. I would ask folks, particularly in states like North Carolina, that in addition to reaching out to your own member, you may want to work with other folks from the state to reach out to other members. There's people, not only in your town, but in other neighboring districts. And in North Carolina, for example, there's 13 representatives. So in addition to Mel Watt, there's 12 other folks from the state that would be interested in hearing about what's been going on, particularly if you know of other people. For example, if you have a support group or folks on Facebook that you talk to, getting them involved. And then kind of taking that group message to a bunch of different offices. And then not even just, there may be 13 congressmen in the state in total, but there's going to be like 3 other congressmen who are right in that local geographic area, and that message might resonate with them more too.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you.
Yeah, and I also want to, I think that's something important I'd like to expand on, but not just jump all over Diane's question, and that is I do encourage everybody to kind of think of yourself as an ambassador on this and work with other people locally, to kind of have that group effort, particularly if there's a support group or a Facebook group, ways to get people involved. And I just received an advocacy letter from somebody, and the advocacy letter started, I don't have this condition, but my friend does, and they told me how important this is. And I'm asking you to take action. So, there's everybody everybody who you might, there's a whole bunch of folks who are good potential advocates and can reach out to their members of Congress. They don't necessarily have to be personally impacted. They just have to make the same request. Somebody I care about has pulmonary hypertension, or I'm a good friend of the PH community. I've been going to a certain fundraiser for years, and I'd like you to co-sponsor this bill. You have those connections locally. You know who might be willing to help out, and it wouldn't hurt to ask them.
The conference has been unmuted.
So we have a question from Bonnie. She was curious when the last effective date to contact your representatives to make a difference. I would go ahead and say sometime this year, probably before the elections, or would you, Dane, do you have a better answer for that?
Yeah, I would say as soon as possible. In order for the bill to become law, it's got to pass the House and then the Senate, and then the President has to sign it. So we really would like the bill to be through the House in the next couple of months. So I would encourage everybody to take action on this soon and to try and get as many House co-sponsors as we can. The House is going to be back in local districts in April. So if anybody is looking for a chance to try and meet with their members specifically, April would be a great opportunity. And I would also think about that as probably one of the latest opportunities to meet. But please start soon and start often. I know that Elizabeth mentioned that a lot of these staffers are young, and but they are tremendously powerful. The congressperson will usually defer to them on health issues. So if you meet with the staffer, that staffer is playing a key part in whether or not the office is ultimately going to co-sponsor the bill. There's a good chance that the congressperson defers to them on issues like that. So don't don't discount a staffer meeting. An early staffer meeting may be better than a later meeting with the member personally.
We have another hand raised. Shashi?
Yeah.
Oh, hi.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi.
I had a question. A while ago, we had written notes to our senators at one of our support group meetings, and there was a format letter for that, and we just kind of filled it in. I was wondering if there was one like that to give to people who know us, but not the patients themselves, but people like my friends and stuff. If I can have them do that kind of thing, it would be a lot easier for me to get more people to sign up.
Absolutely. I believe Dane sent me a letter sometime earlier this week that is a letter that a lot of people can use. So we're encouraging people to make district visits and meet with member of Congress, but we recognize that not everyone is able to do that. And like you were mentioning, there are other people, friends and family who want to do something but maybe don't want to go through a visit. We definitely have a form letter that I can email out to everyone on the call, and you can use that and adapt it and send it off to your member of Congress.
Thank you.
We don't have any other questions right now unless, let's see, where are we? We have about 10 minutes left. I have a note from Diane. She is encouraging me to give out her contact information. We've mentioned her a little bit in this call, and she asked a question a little earlier, but she's been on a few district visits, and if anyone maybe would rather talk to someone who's gone through something like this, what it's like to go through as a patient, especially your first one, Diane is a great help. She has a lot of advice. It's just really great at talking people through this. So I don't know, Diane, do you want to just shout it out to us?
Sure. You can call me whenever you want to. My home number is 336-313-5430. My cell phone number is 425-6335. So if you want to talk to another patient who's been doing this for a few years and has, I've done quite a few visits here locally in North Carolina and in other states and in D.C., please feel free to contact me. Or if you see me on Facebook, you can, contact me through there as well.
If you've never done something like this before, I know that Diane would be a great resource, but I just wanted to say that it can be a little daunting or a little, kind of nerve-wracking up front. But really, these offices, particularly the local congressional offices, they're there and they're set up just to take meetings like yours. They're expecting you to call and set up a meeting, and then they're expecting to talk to you. And once you actually go to the local office, you'll see that it's not so much like you're getting your taxes done or something like that kind of office. It's really an office where they're set up to take meetings and to talk to you, and they want to hear from you. That's what they're. So it can be a little nerve-wracking, but your nerves are very easily, they're usually very quickly put to rest when you come in and actually see them and see how they're really, their service or their job is to make you feel comfortable and to have these types of conversations with folks from the area. Would you say that's a fair assessment, Diane?
Absolutely. It is. I remember my first visit, and there were 5 or 6 of us patients that got together from my support group, and we went together. And that helped because we kind of decided who was going to talk about medications. Somebody else was going to talk about their diagnosis process. Someone else was going to talk about cost. So it helped to have other people there, and we all shared it together. And as time has gone on and I've done more, I still get nervous even though I've done a lot of these. But, Dana's right. Once I get in the office and meet the person and sit down, the nerves start to ease, and I kind of, just go with my heart and what's going on. So it is nerve-wracking, but I think it's more of a build-up in my own mind, like, oh, my gosh, I'm going to meet a Congress member. And then when you meet them, it's like, okay, this is pretty cool. And before you know it, it's done, and, you've accomplished what you set out to do.
I think the only thing I would add from everything I just heard was that it sounds like just sort of prepare yourself to have a conversation. Dane's right. We use this word educate. We use, some of these, I have a lot of steps as far as, what you do before, what you do during, and all of this. But really it ends up, I think, being just a conversation about your experience with PH. And I think, Dane is right. He and I can hand all this information to each member of Congress's office. We can show them pages on our website that talk about PH and what it does and why early diagnosis is important. But really, it's your experiences and your stories that are really going to actually make a difference. So maybe just think that it will be more like a conversation rather than this sort of stiff meeting. So at this point, if there are no other questions, I might go ahead and just suggest that we end this webinar early. But like I said in our presentation, please feel free to contact either me or Dane with any questions. If there's something that you think of after this call and you really wish you had thought to ask, send me an email or give me a phone call, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have. So Dane, I'll thank you very much for leading half of this conversation, and I guess I'll thank everyone for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.